Mercedes has the same power unit in its customer cars, yet right now Mercedes also looks like the one team those same customers cannot truly match. That is the contradiction hanging over the first phase of 2026, and it is why this story has gone from quiet garage talk to one of the most important tensions on the grid. George Russell is suddenly sitting in the middle of it, not just as the lead works driver, but as the man showing what this package can really do when the car, the software, and the people behind it all speak the same language. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. Equal parts do not always create equal understanding. That is why the early gap has hit so hard. McLaren, Williams, and Alpine are all running Mercedes power, even yet the first signals of the season point to the works team being much further ahead in how to unlock it. Andrea Stella admitted McLaren felt on the back foot, and James Vowles openly said Williams had been caught out by what Mercedes was doing with its power unit. The real story was never about the lap time. It was about how much the factory team already knew before the customers even finished learning what the car wanted from them, and that changed the pressure around every run, every setup choice, and every race start. Now the stakes are getting bigger because this is no longer just about who built a fast car. Ferrari has already shown signs of being more ready for the launch phase of this new era, and that has made Mercedes look strong in one fight while vulnerable in another. A supplier can protect its edge, but the moment its own customers start feeling locked out, the relationship changes. That tension is already building, and if the first weekends are telling the truth, the next part of this story is not about horsepower at all. It is about the hidden advantage the works team kept for itself. The first mistake people make with this story is thinking the fight begins and ends with the engine itself. It does not. Mercedes can hand over the same power unit to McLaren, Williams, and Alpine and still keep the most valuable edge in the room because the real gain comes from how early the works team shaped the whole car around it. That means cooling, packaging, software behavior, and the way the car is prepared before a single serious lap is run. What no broadcast covered is this. The strongest team is often the one that understands the full operating window first, and that changes everything before the stopwatch even starts judging anyone. That edge showed up long before the first real pressure moment of the season. The reference point that matters here is simple. Mercedes had the latest version of its powertrain in its own car during Bahrain testing, while its customers had to wait until Australia to start learning under race weekend pressure. That gap is not just about extra laps. It is about arriving with answers instead of arriving with questions. When a works team already knows how the car will react across short runs, long runs, and energy use, it can build a weekend around confidence. A customer team is left chasing clarity, and clarity is slow when everyone else is already attacking. So when fans look at the timing screen and ask why the customer cars cannot just match the supplier, they are already asking too late. By then, the gap has been built in meetings, simulations, and choices the public never sees. The same hardware can still produce two very different realities when one team designed the full system around it, and the others are still decoding what they have been given. That is why the next layer of this story matters so much, because once a team loses that early certainty, the damage does not stop in the garage. It follows them all the way onto the track. McLaren did not enter this season expecting to feel blind, but that is exactly the mood this story is creating. The problem is not just missing pace, it is missing certainty. A top team can live with being a little slow for a session or two. What it cannot live with is walking into a run without knowing exactly what the car is about to do with its energy, its setup, and its balance across the lap. That is where this story gets complicated. Andrea Stella was not talking like a man frustrated by one bad weekend. He was talking like a team boss who knew the works outfit had reached understanding first and left everyone else reacting. That difference changes the whole shape of a race weekend. When Mercedes already knows how the power unit behaves in the most important moments, its drivers are not searching for answers in real time. They are executing a plan built before the car even rolls out. McLaren, by contrast, sounded like a team learning on the move, and James Vowles gave Williams the same tone when he admitted they had been caught out by what Mercedes found. He even pointed toward roughly 3/10 on the engine side alone. That kind of loss does not stay isolated in one corner or one lap. It bleeds into confidence, setup direction, and the speed of every decision that follows. And once that uncertainty gets baked into the weekend, the weakness stops being hidden. It starts showing up in the places where drivers have no time to hesitate. A car that still feels half understood is much harder to launch cleanly, much harder to prepare properly, and much harder to trust when the field is compressed and the risk is highest. That is why this story was never only about supplier politics or frustrated customer teams. It was always heading towards something more dangerous, because the moment predictability breaks down, the first place everyone notices is at the start. Australia exposed the danger before most teams were ready to admit it. This was not just a messy launch or a few drivers getting caught out off the line. It was a warning. Cars were arriving at turn 1 with huge differences in speed, and suddenly the opening seconds of a Grand Prix looked far less controlled than they should. George Russell gave the clearest clue when he pointed to the harvest limit on the formation lap, a small rule detail that ended up shaping battery use before the race had even properly started. Nobody in that garage expected what came next, because the weakness was showing itself at the worst possible moment. The issue was brutal in its timing. Drivers at the front could burn through part of that energy window before the start sequence had fully reset, which meant some were reaching the grid with less freedom to prepare the launch the way they wanted. Russell described losing a major part of that margin before the race even got underway, and that helps explain why the field looked so uneven when the lights went out. Liam Lawson was one of the clearest examples of how ugly that can become, while Franco Colapinto had to react instantly to avoid turning a bad start into something much worse. A small systems problem had become a real racing risk. That is what changed the mood around this whole debate. Once a weakness starts threatening clean starts, it stops being a quiet setup problem and turns into a subject every driver pays attention to. Some teams were now looking for rule relief, others were arguing the answer was already there if rivals had prepared better. And suddenly Ferrari had something very valuable in its hands. It was not only pace or confidence, it was proof that one supplier had read this situation earlier than the rest, which is exactly where the next part of the story comes in. Ferrari saw this problem earlier than most teams, and that is why its role in this story matters so much. While Mercedes customers were still trying to understand why the launch phase felt so unstable, Ferrari already looked like a supplier that had prepared its side of the grid for the new demands of 2026. That gave Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc something more valuable than a quick getaway. It gave them a car that looked ready for the moment when the race first asks the hardest question. The difference was not only in performance. It was in how calm Ferrari seemed while others were still searching for the right operating window. That calm did not come from nowhere. Ollie Behrman, now racing for Haas and no longer a rookie in Formula 1, openly praised Ferrari for being helpful with deployment strategy and for sharing the kind of information customer teams actually need if they want to get on top of a new power unit. That is a huge contrast. One supplier appears to be protecting every layer of understanding, while the other appears far more willing to help its customer teams settle into the season. Cadillac also sits inside that Ferrari-powered world this year, which makes the bigger picture impossible to ignore. One side is guarding knowledge, the other is spreading confidence. And that is where the pressure shifts again. A fast supplier can win admiration, but an open supplier can build loyalty, and those are not always the same thing. Ferrari may not control every weekend, but it is already showing the grid a very different way to manage this new era, one that makes its own customers feel supported rather than stranded. That does not end the story between Mercedes and its clients. It sharpens it, because once a customer team starts feeling shut out while a rival supplier looks more collaborative, the tension stops being temporary and starts becoming something much bigger over the course of a season. Toto Wolff can live with angry customers if Mercedes is back in control of the championship fight. That is the cold truth sitting underneath this entire situation. A works team does not build an advantage just to hand it away in the name of good feeling. And if Mercedes believes this tighter grip is the price of staying ahead, then the complaints from McLaren, Williams, and Alpine become background noise. But this is the part teams never forget. Once a customer starts feeling like it is buying hardware without getting the full picture, trust begins to wear down. And in Formula 1, that kind of damage lasts longer than one race or one season. That is why this is no longer just a technical disagreement. It is becoming a question of influence. Zach Brown and Andrea Stella are not going to enjoy watching McLaren carry Mercedes' power while feeling blocked from the deeper understanding that could unlock more pace. James Vowles is not going to look at Williams being caught out and treat that like a harmless learning phase. Alpine will be watching too. Because no customer wants to feel like it exists mainly to strengthen the supplier while getting only part of the benefit in return. What starts as frustration in March can turn into hard decisions when contracts, future plans, and long-term alignment come into focus. Mercedes may still decide that none of this matters if the results keep coming. Winning changes the mood around everything, but if the works team stumbles later in the year, or if one of the customers closes the gap anyway, then every complaint being made now becomes much louder and much more dangerous. A supplier can protect its edge for a while, but once the teams around it start thinking beyond this season, the real cost begins to grow. And that is exactly why the next step in this story matters most, because now the whole fight turns toward the championship itself. And the early shape of this championship is starting to tell a harsher story than most fans expected. Raw speed still matters, of course, but this season is asking something even more unforgiving. Which team can understand its package first, trust it first, and keep building while everyone else is still trying to decode the basics? That is why Mercedes has become so dangerous again. George Russell is not just driving a quick car, he is driving a car that already looks more settled in the most important phases of a weekend. Meanwhile, McLaren, Williams, and Alpine are burning time just trying to close the knowledge gap, and in a title race that kind of delay can quietly become fatal. Ferrari is the team that keeps this from becoming a simple Mercedes story. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc are sitting inside a setup that appears better prepared for the launch demands of 2026. And that matters because points can disappear long before the checkered flag if one team keeps nailing those opening moments while others keep scrambling to recover. McLaren still has the strength to respond, and Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are too strong to stay quiet for long. But the damage comes when one side begins the season with answers and the other begins with homework. In a year like this, the first stretch of races can shape the entire emotional balance of the title fight. So the opening question now has a much clearer answer. Mercedes did not simply arrive with a strong power unit, it arrived with a stronger understanding of the whole system around it. And that may be the most valuable edge on the grid right now, but that advantage comes with a cost. The more the customers feel left behind, the more this becomes a battle between short-term control and long-term fallout. And when those two pressures collide, the season stops being about a few frustrated teams and starts revealing something much bigger about how power really works in Formula 1. Mercedes may be winning the first phase of this fight, but the victory comes with a price that could follow it much longer than a few race weekends. A supplier can choose to protect every bit of its hidden advantage, and from a pure competition view that makes complete sense. Yet the moment customer teams stop feeling like partners and start feeling like outsiders, the whole relationship changes shape. McLaren, Williams, and Alpine are not just measuring lap time anymore. They are measuring how much of the picture they are actually being allowed to see, and that kind of doubt has a way of staying alive even after the standings begin to move. Ferrari, meanwhile, has placed a very different idea on the table. By looking more open with Haas and Cadillac, and by appearing more settled around the launch phase of the new rules, it has turned supplier behavior into part of the competitive story. That matters because teams remember who helped them when the season felt unstable. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc benefit from that calm inside the works team, but the bigger effect may land outside Ferrari itself, where customer squads now have a visible comparison for how this relationship can be handled. One model is based on control. The other seems to be built on shared confidence. So this is where the full weight of the story lands. The 2026 season is not only exposing which team found speed first, it is exposing which team controls understanding, which team shares it, and which teams are being forced to survive without enough of it. Mercedes may still turn this into a title run, and if that happens, the complaints around it will sound a lot quieter. But if the balance shifts later in the year, the anger building underneath this story could become just as important as the pace itself. In 2026, the most powerful thing on the grid may not be the engine, but the truth one team chose to keep closest.